Okay, welcome to Google Sheets for Finance series of videos, and we'll be covering a common set of financial functions that are available in Google Sheets. This series will be great for somebody who is interested to learn about financial functions in Google Sheets, and really anybody who has decent math skills can follow these tutorials. By following these tutorials, you should have pretty good idea about some of these topics and what you can do with these tools. So we're going to start with basically getting future value, present value, and talking about FV and PV functions in this video at least. So, and then we'll get into a lot of other functions as we go forward. Anyway, so let's get started. So basically we have $1,000 of our initial investment value. And what we want to do, we basically want to see if we have 5% return on our investment on each period, and it's a compound interest, how much money we're going to have 6 periods after. So what does that compound interest mean? So let's get started with the first period. So what we want to do, we want to increase this $1,000 by 5% in our next period. Equal sign, and that's our $1,000, right? That's that cell. And I want to increase that $1,000. So I'm going to multiply this by 5%. So the 5% to increase that, so I'm going to multiply that in parentheses by 1 plus that 5% to increase the value. So 1 plus the 5% is going to give us basically 105%. As you can see here, as I'm highlighting it, it gives me the results. So if we multiply that 105% by our B4 cell, which is our initial dollar amount, which is $1,000, we should now get the new amount as an end result. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And you can see if we increase $1,000 by 5%, we get $1,050. Now, what does compound interest mean? So compound interest means that in the next period after this, when we move to period 2, this 5% that increases our investment is not going to apply to the initial investment value. It's going to apply to our investment value after the return in our first period. So now we're going to take this 1,050 and basically add 5% to that. So to get this going, what I'm going to do is simply go back to my initial formula. And I'm going to make sure I lock this A4 cell, which is my percentage. Press F4 there, just like that. So that's locked. So now I'm going to just drag this down. So what's going to happen when I drag this down is when I go back here, because I didn't lock this, it's going to, see, I didn't lock this one. So it's going to move to this cell. And now we're taking with this $1,050 and we increase that by 105%. Then we take the next number after that, we increase it by 105%. And we keep going. And by our 6th period, we have $1,340.10. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's one way to do this. So another way to do this is by using a different type of formula. And let's go ahead and use that. So to get to the same exact number, I can start with my equal sign and say, well, this is my initial investment value that I have, which is $1,000. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to multiply that by our 1 plus that 5%. Which is our, again, 105%. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 periods. So to do that, I can simply do to the power of 6, the 6th period right here. And if I enter, I'm going to get exactly the same amount. So what I did, I took my initial investment, which is $1,000, and then I multiplied that by 105% to the power of 6 because I had 6 periods. So if you understand order of operations in Google Sheets, you know that the first order of operations are parentheses. So the first thing that's going to happen, we're going to take this 1 plus this 5%. We're going to get 105%. The next thing in our order of operations is going to be to the power of 6. So we're going to take that 105% and do this part. And then we're going to multiply that by our initial investment, which is B4. And that gets us exactly the same amount. Hopefully that makes sense. So now we can also get to the same amount using a function called FV, which is our future value. So in this function, the first argument is the rate. So my rate is going to be 5%, comma. So then we have number of periods. So if you remember, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 periods, comma again. Then I have a payment amount. This function can also handle if we make payments, but we don't make any payments. So I can either put 0 in here or simply just do a comma, and that will be basically 0. Now I'm going to do 0 to make it simple. We're not making any payments. And then present value. So present value is the current initial amount we have. So that's our investment amount, $1,000. So I'm going to click on that. B4, right? And finally, for now, I'm going to just skip that optional argument, close this, and hit enter. And we should get that $1,340.10. Now, you may notice that when I get this amount, I actually get it as a negative value. This is a common thing that you'll probably have to get used to in finance, is that we think about money coming in our account or going out of our account. So what does that mean, right? So what that means is that if I invest $1,000, that should really be money going out of my bank account, right? I'm taking the money out of my bank account or wherever I'm taking it out of, and I'm investing that money. So initially, that's negative $1,000 that goes out. So if I switch that initial investment to negative, now by the time I get the return from my investment, it's going to be this much, which is a positive now going to my account. Hopefully that makes sense. And now I'm just going to reverse that, but that's why we get the negative. Now, if you simply want to convert it to positive, you can just do negative future value, and that's going to get us to the same number. So that gets us to the same $1,340.10. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's how we get our future value. So there's also a function called PV in Google Sheets, and that's our present value function. And it helps if you actually type it right. Present value. So what does present value function do? So present value function is useful if you're trying to reverse this. So what I mean by that is, let's say we have what's our final future value, which is what gains are we going to get from an investment, and we know that we're going to get $1,340.10. That's the number we have. And we know that we made a 5% return on our investment per period for 6 periods. So we want to know if we had, let's just type periods 6, and rate was 5% of our return per period, right? So we want to know, so how much did we invest initially? So we want to basically go back. So to do this, we're going to use a function called PV for present value. And for our present value, the first one is our rate. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that 5%, comma, then number of periods. So that's going to be 6, comma again, payment amount. So again, there is none. So 0 there, comma, or you can just skip it and do comma. That should get you the same thing. Then we get the future value, right? So the future value is that 1,340 and 10, which is the amount we have right here. And finally, the last argument again is optional. So I'm going to simply close this, hit enter, and you can see we get to that initial investment, which is $1,000. So that's our present value. Now let's look at a case with payments, because if you remember in our future value, for example, we have this option for payments we make. See? So for example, a payment $100. All right. So now let's take a look at our table again, and we'll try to do this the old-fashioned way, and then we'll try to use a function for this, obviously, to make it much easier. But to be able to understand what's going on, let's make payments. So we're going to do a payment of $100 to this investment. So you can think about payments in many different ways. In this particular case, I'm going to assume that we're basically adding more to our investment, investing basically more. In addition to this $1,000, then each period we're adding a little more investment every month. And let's say we're going to keep adding $200 investment every month to this. So I'm just going to put this down. And I'm going to consistently be doing that $200 investment every time. So let's do this calculation. So how are we going to do this calculation? So what's going to happen, we're going to have this percentage. So we're going to be raising it by a certain percent, right? So let's add another column here. I'm going to say equals to, so we're going to take our initial investment and we're going to raise it by that 5%. Right? So far we should add that 1,050, but we're also investing $200 more. So I'm going to add this 200 to it. And at that point, we're going to have 1,250. Now, when we get to our next month, our investment now is going to be added to this amount, 1,250. So again, it's going to be equal to this amount, right? And we're going to multiply that by 1 plus that 5%. And in this case, I'm going to lock that 5% to make sure I can copy it later on. So that's what I'm raising it by, right? And then I'm going to add my $200. So there we are. So we're going to end up with this much as an end result. So that's going to be 1,250. Then we're raised by 5%, and then we add another $200. And I'm going to keep adding this down, and I'm doing another $200 here, right? And I ended up with this much future value, 2,700. So let's get to that same number using FV function equals FV, future value. So I'm going to have my rate, 5%. I'm going to have my number of periods, which is 6. I'm going to have my payment amount, which is the payment amount I have, comma. I'm going to have the present value, which is 1,000. And finally, that should do it. So $2,700 and 48 cents. So we're getting to the same exact total. And in this case, what I'm doing, I keep reinvesting money in addition to my initial investment. And that's going to be the total dollar amount that I have. So when we think about investment, there are really many ways to think about it. So you can think about investment as you are the investor, so you're putting the money and you're getting some sort of return. Or you can think about it as somebody else is an investor and they're investing in your operation. So if somebody invested $1,000 in your operation and they are making all of these payments to your operation, again, so that would be positive amounts they're putting in to our operation. And at some point, we have to repay them for their investment with a negative dollar amount. So again, there are different ways you can approach this. Getting back to our core, so that's our payments with it. So again, we can do the same present value if we have this amount and we want to get back to what was the initial value. We can do that using our PV function. And again, this is the rate. Number of periods is 6. Payment amount is going to be constant $200. We have a future value that's this, and that's it. And that gets us back to our initial investment, which is 1,000. So again, we're basically stepping back with our present value here. So again, present value PV with payments. And this is FV with payments. Now let's finally get to the last argument in our present and future value functions. So we already talked about the first one, the second one, number of periods, payment amount, the present value. Now finally, there was this optional end or beginning in the end that we didn't use. So if you look right here, that end or beginning, basically the payments that we're making, are they due at the end or the beginning of each period? So as a default, we're basically looking at 0 option. So if I go and change this, hit escape, go back here, comma, and 0, we're going to get exactly the same thing. So it defaults to this last option being that the payments are due at the end of each period. Now, you can also do the option that the payment is due at the beginning of each period. So instead of 0, we can use 1. So what impact is that going to have? So I'm going to add a row here. So in this case, we're going to have an initial investment, but instead of applying that 200 by the end of the period that we said we're going to have, we're going to apply that by the beginning of the period. So essentially, when we invest this $1,000, we're just going to add that $200 right away in the beginning of the period instead of paying by the end of the period. So initially, our first one is going to be, let's take this $1,000 and we're going to multiply this by 1 plus that 5% that I have. So that should just get me 5%. But again, our payments were due in the beginning. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to say, let's take the B4, which is our initial investment, and I'm going to add my $200 to it. And then I'm going to raise this by my 1 plus my 5%. And I'm going to end up with this much. So on the next period, we're going to take that amount that we have, and we're going to add our payment to it. and we're going to raise it by 5% again. And I want to lock this right here, the percentage. So that's that. Keep going. We get our number. Now let's see how we can match that number. So again, I'm going to go FV, future value, and I have the rate, 5%. I have number of periods, 6. I have payment amount, 1,000. Oh, that's not it, is it? No. 200, comma. I have present value, which is 1,000. And finally, this is not going to be beginning. The end of the period is going to be the beginning of the period. We're going to make our payments. So 1, hit enter, and there is the same number we're getting here. So that's when our payments are due by the beginning of the period. We're going to get that number. So hopefully you understood what happened here. So essentially here, the first thing we did, we made our investment, then it accumulated that 5% return, and then we added, by the end of the period, we made the payment. So then over that amount, we did another interest, and then we did another payment over that, and so on. In this case, we take that $1,000 and we do that $200 payment right over it, which is like $1,200 in the beginning of the period. And then we immediately started accumulating interest on both of those at the same time. And then we kind of went from there. And that should get us that same value we're looking for. So that's our future value. And obviously the same way you can do the present value. So the PV, so we're going to have our rate. So that's our rate. So number of periods, 6. Payment amount is going to be at 200, comma. We're going to do the future value, which is going to be this, comma again. And finally, we want to make sure that our payments are at the beginning. So 1. So that gets us back to our present value. And I believe that should cover everything about future value and present value functions here. Maybe I've missed something, but that should at least be vast majority of what we need to understand. So that's that for this video. And in our next video, we'll start talking about net present value and internal rate of return. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.